to discuss EU digital security. We've heard a lot about it today also from Minister Niemczycki, from the Secretary of State in the Polish Ministry, that however we see also that today no longer military strength is only discussed. We are more shifting this dialogue towards technology, towards cybersecurity, infrastructure, social resilience, and all the other topics which came up also with the geopolitical situation that we are facing. We are pleased here to have Laurensem Cerulus, the cybersecurity editor, the deputy technology editor at Politico Europe. Welcome, Laurens.
Thank you.
And I will jump right into more, I would say, Eastern flank topics, coming from Poland and also having here a lot of Polish representatives. How do you perceive the role of Poland in cybersecurity, also developing with the conflict going on in Ukraine and Poland? So how do you see the role of Poland? Are we actually in a way ahead of other countries facing the situation that we are facing today?
So yeah, I'm happy to give my thoughts. Just for perspective, I've been looking at cybersecurity and technology policy in Brussels and in Europe for the past 10 years or so. And so with that sort of historical perspective, I think what's been interesting just in the past months even up to last week is that obviously Europe is faced with a lot of threats when it comes to cybersecurity, and it's faced with a lot of challenges when it comes to technology security. And so we see those things play out in different places in Europe. What's interesting about Poland is that it plays a sort of role of what I would call a frontline state in the hybrid warfare. So it's very hard to say where hybrid warfare takes place. It takes place sort of under the radar of what you would normally consider conflict. But we see it taking place in different places in Europe, and Poland is one of those places. So if we look at sort of issues like the use of drones as a hybrid warfare tool, if we look at even migration as a hybrid strategy, those are issues that Poland is faced directly with. When we turn to cybersecurity specifically, Poland claims to have the most cybersecurity attacks on its country of the whole of Europe. So clearly this is where right now, if there is such a thing as a hot war in cybersecurity, it is playing out in Poland. And so what that means is that Poland is a country where at least we look at from Brussels and with a European perspective, as a country where a lot of the premises and a lot of the defenses and the frameworks that we have for cybersecurity and for defense, I think more broadly, get tested in Poland. And so, yes, it's a very interesting time. Just to give you one example, last week we had an incident in Poland's nuclear facilities, or at least an attempt at attacking Poland's nuclear facility, at which point the government said, well, we're investigating whether this was from Iranian actors. So you can see this was one of the first, if not the first, incident on European soil, EU soil, I must say, because Albania had an incident just earlier, where the Iranian conflict enters European or EU territory, and we are forced to deal with this in our own domestic space. So this is a way that I think Poland is really jumping out as a European country.
That's really good to hear, also being a Pole. However, you're also covering politically and regulatory affairs in terms of cybersecurity, not only in technology. There are several initiatives currently on the agenda of the EU, now coming to the EU from Poland. Which initiatives, which policies do you think would be most important to build Europe's digital resilience, digital and security resilience?
I think it's a lot of things happening at once right now. As is often the case in Brussels, there's different parts of the machinery, of the EU machinery, that try to move forward with their own initiatives. If I can single out a couple, I might point to one that was presented in January, which is the Cybersecurity Act. So a revision of basically Europe's basic cybersecurity law. This revision is an attempt at trying to create a system where Europe can respond to issues of supply chain security in a coherent way, in a strategic way. And so very much it is sort of what I would say a cybersecurity law of the second generation. If the first generation was about creating basic cybersecurity protections in European organizations, in government organizations, in its industry, etc., we're entering sort of a second phase of European cybersecurity law that is more strategic and that looks at the strategic questions around cybersecurity. So it's very different in that perspective. To explain that just slightly, there's a lot of talk about how this law will enable Europe to secure supply chains by imposing measures that restrict high-risk vendors. And so in a lot of sectors, people are now looking at Chinese actors, Chinese market players that come with what security officials say is a heightened security risk. But Europe doesn't really have the tools. It basically, taking measures against those things go against a lot of what the European Union has built up in terms of a regulatory framework. So it's really, this is a law that really forces the Commission and the Parliament and Council to reconsider how it deals with these strategic questions that pose cybersecurity risks. So that's one. Secondly, I'll add, there's a package of tech sovereignty legislation coming. This will include, for instance, how Europe deals with resilience in its cloud sector, how it invests in chips, and that also has a defense and security component there. It will include a number of things that basically look at creating a Europe that has more control over its tech sector, that has more champions, and that has more to play for in the world. That package is coming up. We heard it was going to be March, then it was going to be April. Now it's been postponed to May. And I think what we're looking at right now at Politico and my reporters that are investigating this is already now in the drafting, we're seeing that this is bringing up very difficult questions for Europe that it's not very sort of used to dealing with. One question would be, how do you restrict certain vendors from your cloud sector, and what, like, is there a security argument around using certain vendors within your cloud sector? That is not an easy thing to solve, and so we're seeing sort of the rubber meet the road with all these legislations. We've had talk of technological sovereignty for many years. We've had talk about resilience in the cloud sector for many years, but now we're seeing actually the proposals, or at least the attempts to sort of define and come up with a comprehensive framework that combines technology regulation and security. And I think that's sort of the second generation of technology regulation that we're entering.
I have a difficult question. How do you foresee actually the future of Europe in terms of digital sovereignty, having all this in mind, you just said, and the complexity of these topics that are on the table and are sometimes contradictory to each other, right?
Yeah, I think we're in a particular time in history that predicting the future is probably the worst idea. So I don't claim to have a crystal ball, and I think the world is changing at a very rapid pace, which means that we constantly have to challenge our own premises and our own thinking. What I would say is, to a certain extent, Brussels will be Brussels, and with that I mean, the EU works in a particular way that looks for compromise, that looks for a common interest, common base across many different countries. And what we're seeing now is that this is, to a certain extent, a limitation of the European Union, because it means any sort of way forward on, for instance, coming up with this more comprehensive strategic framework around technology, it comes with a myriad of questions that are very difficult to solve for the policymakers that are trying to solve them. It slows down the process. It means Europe is slower than other actors in the world. So there's a number of limiting elements. At the same time, I think the European system, the European democracy, and how we craft laws also mean that there is a compromising factor, and there is a sense that Europe is a stable actor right now in the world. in a world where I think stability is harder to find, for instance, on the other side of the Atlantic, or with other partners across the world. So it's very hard to judge, who will eventually have the answers to the big questions of our time. But I think Europe does have a couple of advantages, as well as what a lot of people see as sort of the limitations of its framework.
Talking about stability, what we see coming, and what you probably also see as a journalist yourself, is a big flow of disinformation. We've seen it a lot in Poland, not only in Poland, in entire Europe. What I always like to say is that the infrastructure and technology is kind of a bloodstream of the modern democracies. However, the oxygen is information. And how do you see that, and also what's the perception in Brussels in terms of information security, information resilience also? How do you perceive that? Is that even a topic that kind of implies security also, and that's a part of Europe being secure?
I think there's sort of two responses to this. One is what I would guess a more sort of security-oriented response to it, and another is a more regulatory response to it. Now, if you talk about disinformation, most of that conversation is about what is on our social media sites, how does the information get distributed, so media and social media first and foremost. And I think the European Union has tried to come up with a response to this with their Digital Services Act, which was a law drafted in the last mandate of Ursula von der Leyen. Now that act is in place, and yet we've seen that it is, one, very difficult procedurally to enforce it, and secondly, politically, it's become almost like a bomb in European legislation. This is the one law that the US administration of Donald Trump also takes very much offense with. It is the law that also, that is an external factor, but also I would add, inside Europe, domestically, it's a very difficult balancing act for the EU and the Commission to enforce this law on member countries who have their own sort of, obviously their sovereignty and their own way of thinking about freedom of speech and freedom of information. And so we're really seeing that friction play out at the center of the enforcement of the DSA. So my take so far is that I think the DSA has had a hard time in the more than a year that it's been enforced, now a year and a couple of months. It's had a very hard time. First fine was only just recently, and we're now figuring out whether the receiving platform of that fine has actually paid the fine or not. It looks like they did. But so we're at the very start of this, and already we're seeing the political, the charge, it's so politically charged that I think Brussels will have to somehow continue with testing it, but at the same time it confronts it with a lot of difficult questions.
So also, despite of the regulations that you mentioned regarding disinformation or digital media act or whatever it's on the table, what do you think is the role of media regarding remaining secure and being resilient against disinformation? How do you perceive that, maybe more from your perspective as a journalist probably, and what you're observing?
I think this is where we'll see eye to eye, Karolina, because I'm a very strong believer in the fourth estate. I'm a very strong believer in the role that media plays in a democratic system and to hold people in power to account. That is the reason why Politico does what it does in Brussels, because I think we started 11 years ago. There was a lack of this in Brussels, was my perspective, and now there is a clear accountability journalism, a very vibrant landscape. Media is under pressure. One of those things is artificial intelligence. It's really challenging the whole media landscape. My strong belief is that us as journalists, our role is to pursue truth. And as long as we keep that value at the core of what we do, it is our defense against what artificial intelligence will do to the media landscape, to the information landscape. It is our defense also to the pressures that media is getting from some governments in how it operates, how it functions, and whether it can actually do its role. It's really just going back to the core of what journalism is about, and I'm a believer in that. I might sound naive, and I hope I'm not. But that is the role that I think we should be fulfilling.
Laurensem Cerulus is our guest. Thank you very much, Laurens. That's a very optimistic closing, and we hope we'll be there also in a year when we meet again, I hope.